But we begin again today in Turkey, where the president's declaration of a state of emergency is driving fears about the future of democracy in the nation. President Tayyip Erdogan used a public address today to impose a 3-month state of emergency on Turkey. This gives authorities broad powers of arrest and removes the requirement for court authorisation. The president says the powers are necessary to root out those behind last week's failed coup. But his opponents say the move could threaten democracy altogether. Anne Barker has our report.
In Istanbul's Taksim Square, supporters of President Erdogan burn an effigy of the man blamed for last Friday's attempted coup. The black-clad figure is made to resemble Fethullah Gulen, a Muslim cleric exiled in the US who's accused of orchestrating the plot from afar. As they set the effigy alight, the crowd calls for the death penalty for Gulen and his supporters. If they approve the death penalty, I hope they hang them in front of us, he says. I hope we're going to watch them hanged the way we watch films. Every night, thousands of Turks have been on the streets to rally behind the Turkish president, who, after narrowly escaping the coup plotters, is now in a growing position of strength. Overnight, he's declared a state of emergency for 3 months to give government and the police stronger powers to arrest and detain those suspected of involvement and, quote, rid the military of the virus of subversion.
The purpose of the declaration of the state of emergency is, in fact, to be able to take the most efficient steps in order to remove this threat as soon as possible, which is a threat to democracy, to the rule of law, and to the rights and freedoms of our citizens in our country.
With each day, the number of people arrested, sacked or suspended grows. With some reports, as many as 60,000 people are now targeted. President Erdogan on Al Jazeera television said nearly 10,000 could face trial.
We have started obtaining significant documents and significant pools of data that has started to come pouring in. Right now, we have 9,004 people in detention, in pre-trial detention, and we have 1,933 arrested. So with those in pre-trial detention and people that have already been arrested, it doesn't mean that it's the end of this. It hasn't ended. It hasn't come to an end, in my opinion. So those in pre-trial detention and those that are arrested, I think they will lead us to many more names. That's the reality that's starting to become obvious now.
President Erdogan insists his actions, including the state of emergency, are lawful and constitutional and not intended to curb basic freedoms. But many are sceptical. One human rights lawyer, Vildan Yirembasoglu, says she's aware of no law giving such power. In fact, there's no state of emergency law or martial law right now. They don't exist. And she says basic freedoms will be seriously restricted. Local authorities may declare rules and restrictions, she says. More precisely, freedoms may be restricted. Both state of emergency and martial law have specific rules, but there's a serious limitation of rights. Meanwhile, families of those arrested have been left with little news of their fate. One man, Ilhan Ada, waited outside an Istanbul court for news of his son inside. He said on the night of the failed coup, his son's unit, a tank squadron, had been ordered on a training exercise, but he'd done nothing wrong. I think it's wrong, he says. It's understandable for the high-ranking soldiers, but the lowest-ranking soldiers are not guilty, I think. One analyst, Sona Chapdai at the Washington Institute, says he fears the intensifying crackdown will result in a suspension of democracy.
I think the emergency law will allow the government to extend detention times before people can be taken in front of the court so that they can process the thousands of people they have arrested without violating the law, now that they can keep people longer in detention. But at the same time, I think this allows the government to crack down on freedom of assembly if it wants to, bring in curfews, limit overseas travel. So this is unfortunately a suspension of liberties most Turks are not familiar with, and it's a very unwelcome development for Turkey's democracy. So I hope it lasts only 3 months, and I hope it also allows Turkey to come up from this mess.
Fethullah Gulen, the man blamed for the coup, has denied involvement and says he's merely a scapegoat for the president's increasingly autocratic behaviour.
Anne Barker reporting.